Welcome to Garden DC, the podcast about everything gardening in the Washington, D.C. and Mid-Atlantic region. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine, and we're aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. This episode, we're joined by Kelly Billing, owner of Water Becomes a Garden in the Baltimore area. Kelly, how are you?
I'm excellent, and how are you?
Doing good. So we're finally having a warm weekend in the Mid-Atlantic area. Supposedly on Saturday, it's going to hit 85 degrees.
Yeah, winter wasn't very strong or potent, but it was certainly long.
Mm-hmm. So for the water gardening business, has that affected you a lot?
It has delayed a lot of projects along with COVID. There's a hesitancy, but
Mm-hmm.
plant material hasn't progressed as much as usual. For example, I just finished harvesting Lotus. Let me see, the first week of May. And
Mm-hmm.
I've never gone beyond the first week of April.
Wow.
So a
So,
full 4 weeks with these nighttime cold temperatures.
mm-hmm. And when you say harvesting lotus, are you harvesting seed or what are you doing?
Harvesting tubers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so for anyone who doesn't know, I guess the easiest way to explain is lotus is like a potato that looks like a banana. But you plant a potato and it grows a plant
Mm-hmm.
that prospers all year. And then in the fall, the potato that you planted rots away because it was food for the growth for the season. And then in the fall, there are lots of potatoes to collect. And we don't collect lotus in the fall. We have long-term storage issues that we haven't conquered, but we
Mm-hmm.
harvest them in the spring. And you're basically collecting tubers that they're long like a banana.
Mm-hmm. And that's specifically for the mid-Atlantic climate. Say you were in a tropical climate like Indonesia or elsewhere, you would be doing it differently.
Yeah, they harvest in January,
Mm-hmm.
unless they're
Okay.
the opposite climate of us. Um,
Mm-hmm.
then, say Southern Hemisphere, then they would be harvesting at a different time.
Yeah. So you've harvested your lotus and you pot them up for customers, or do you bare root sell them?
I sell some bare root. This is my first official harvest. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I have been collecting plants for probably, I don't know, 30 years.
Wow.
And so they've been in all kinds of places, friends, family, my backyard, anybody who
Mm-hmm.
is willing to say, hold a few plants while, I gather more and look for space. So I have found some space and I'm leasing from a farm locally and they all have a home. So I did my first full official harvest. I had 45 cultivars that I had collected.
Wow.
I surprised myself,
Hmm.
and it was pretty successful.
And how are they wintered over?
So I grow some in beds, which I
Mm-hmm.
harvest direct from the bed, bare root, and then I can either sell them bare root or potted. And then I grow some in pots or whatever's left over from the previous year's sales season can then be harvested in the spring. Or you can sell them as a second year plant, which would be more
Okay.
mature. Going
Mm-hmm.
into like a landscape um, scenario early in the season, they might want to have something that is left over from the previous year so that they'll get a better display for their client.
Nice. So when you say you're storing them at friends' homes and families, is that in a basement situation, a garage,
No,
or dug into the ground?
dug
Mm-hmm.
into the ground or raised
Mm-hmm.
beds.
Nice.
Winters have not been so extreme in more recent years. like 96, 2010. I think
Uh,
2010 was probably the really worst winter that we've had recently.
yeah, that is one for the memory. So
Yeah.
that one's been. So let's rewind a little bit and tell people how you became enamored of lotuses in particular and water gardening in general.
I had the blessing of a mom who we spent most of our childhood in the woods,
Hmm.
um, identifying plants from partridgeberry and jack in the pulpit to dogwoods and serviceberry types of trees. We were always in the woods, walking, hiking. We had a fire trail behind our house. And so I was always a gardener. My mom was a gardener. We learned how, if you were going to bring something from the forest, you had to bring some of the forest soil and make it feel at home when you transferred it to the house back then. And my mom was an avid gardener. My grandparents were gardeners. My dad was a gardener. As a child, we used to sit. I'd come home from school and sit on the sidewalk and wait for the 4 o'clocks to open. I thought that was amazing. We've had a pond at every single house since
Mm.
birth. Uh, the old uh, flying saucers, the concrete flying saucer dish that was what constituted ponds back in the 1960s. We had those. We had, small ones, big ones. And I just, one weekend, my uncle was starting a business, and I went and asked him if he needed help, and that was 35 years ago.
Mm.
And that was an aquatic nursery for which I worked for 32 years, and I'm my third year on my own. Um,
Wow, congratulations for starting your own business.
yeah, and
That's a huge endeavor.
it is a huge endeavor. Uh, but I really enjoyed it, and I became captivated by Lotus. Was around the time that my children were young when I was working in the nursery. My daughter's almost 30.
Hmm.
And I think I learned the most about it through children's eyes. Um, it was a mechanism for our birthday party hats, lotus leaves upside down on your head with a string to tie them. All the children look like fairies. My daughter's an artist. She was always very creative. So
Hmm.
she would use flower petals for boats for little baby dolls. And
Oh,
um, so I really, the influence came as much as what I noticed, but I also noticed what children noticed.
hmm.
And that was a love affair. You can eat all parts of it. You can eat the seeds, the tubers, the stems, the leaves, the flowers, teas, stir fry, soup, steaming.
Hmm.
There's so many potential uses. It's also used for medicine. It has a lot of history, a lot of stories. And my daughter wanted to grow only things that we could eat as a child. So Lotus really filled a big chunk of that.
Hmm. And Lotus also has a lot of religious symbolism, um, which is always magical to hear the stories.
It has a tremendous amount of history culturally. I've been to China, and there they have lotus that one is 1,200 years old, and that
Hmm.
one is 600 years old, and that one is 900 years old. And the sense of history, the empowerment from a plant that that it's been known and adored for that many years, specifically to that cultivar, is pretty amazing.
Hmm.
Um, and there are only two parent plants in the world, Hindu lotus and American lotus, and there are over 4,000 named cultivars that came from those two parents. So it has so much depth and history and culture and story. I'm actually helping a lady in India who is writing a book. There were really no growers of lotus in India.
Hmm.
All of it had taken precedent as cultural importance in architecture, um, worship, religion, but it was not really being grown for food or ornamental purposes.
Hmm. Wow. So I have to confess, the only lotus I own is a miniature called Green Cloud, just because I fell in love with that flower. It's kind of peony like green to creamy white, but it's kept in its own separate big pot from the rest of my water garden because I have this fear of the lotus taking over the whole rest of my water garden pond. And I only have like a 9 foot oval. What do you recommend for home gardeners who want one or two lotus in their garden?
I think the easiest lotus I have ever grown is outside the pond. Um,
Mm-hmm.
People often ask, I don't have a pond, how can I have a lotus? I've always had lotus and didn't have a pond until more recently. So if you bury a container, virtually anything that holds water that has
Mm-hmm.
broad enough and deep enough, which deep enough is only 12 inches. It's not like you have to dig a huge hole. You can dig a huge hole if you want a
Mm-hmm.
big lotus garden, but I find they're easier to manage, easier to maintain. The boundaries are very clear.
Mm-hmm.
You can put them into your perennial garden, um, just buried in the ground. My children used it for an ice skating rink in the winter, and they used it, to watch the abundant life that's attracted to it, and to eat it all from a 36 diameter container that's about the size of a kiddie pool.
Mm-hmm.
I've had customers use old bathtubs, old sanitary sinks, for really small lotuses. People have, used very small decorative containers. Anything that holds water will pretty much suffice. And if it's 12 inches deep, then you can bury it and it will winter just fine here.
Great. Yeah, and that is the key, I think, is the shallow depth that you don't want to uh, drown per se or have it too low in the pot.
Yeah, some people have asked me, well, like, is it going to survive the winter if it's only 12 inches deep? Yes, it will survive the winter, but if you make it deeper because you think it needs that or it prefers that, what
Mm-hmm.
happens is it's harder to manage. Your arms aren't much longer than 2 feet.
Mm-hmm.
So I spend a little bit of time doing some maintenance each year, just pulling out the previous year's growth. And that's about all I do besides drop in some fertilizer, which if it's in the pond, I may have to climb in the pond to fertilize it. If it's in the garden, I
Mm-hmm.
can just throw it in.
And what kind of fertilizer do you recommend?
I use a product called Pond Tabs, and I also use a product called Landon's. But Landon's is
Mm-hmm.
very hot, and you have to use it with caution. Pond Tabs Plus, they're a little bit more expensive, but I find that you can use about 50% as much of it, and you
Mm-hmm.
get a better feed. The humic acid makes the fertilizer more available, so you can use less of it.
Hmm. That's a great tip. So, you talked about 4,000 lotus varieties coming
In
from
the world.
the in the world, coming from the American and the Asian. Of those 4,000, gun to your head, Kelly. And I know this is like picking your favorite children. What would be your top three?
My top three. Well, I'll start by saying I've never met a lotus that I don't love,
Mm-hmm.
unless her flowers are hidden among her foliage. And my first favorite will probably always be Mrs. Perry D. Slocum.
Uh,
It's
totally agree. Totally agree.
she, she's
Yeah.
consistent, productive, easy to take care of, multiple color flowers on the same plant. Um, so they come out pink, a vibrant, just voluptuous pink, and then they fade each day. They're open 3 to 4 days to a pale yellow. So
Hmm.
you'll get multiple colored flowers on the same plant. And I think it's like a first love. I'm always going to love her because she was the first one I had. Now, I think, and I think still my second favorite is white single flowering lotus. There's
Hmm.
something very pure and elegant, um, about the whiteness and the story and the history of Lotus, um, where if a lotus can rise from the depths of the mud toward the
Mm-hmm.
sky or toward God or toward, whoever you worship, then so can a person. And there's just something
Mm-hmm.
about white single traditional lotus that brings to mind that cultural significance.
Mm-hmm. That classic shape and that
Hmm.
that that totally classic silhouette.
Yeah, white flowers are not always the most popular, but I do love white lotus.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
And the third one, I would, oh, that would be really hard. Um,
You can have a tie.
well, I'm a sucker for a plant with a
Mm-hmm.
story. And
Mm-hmm.
there is one called Thousand Petal. I'm growing
Mm.
it for the first time this year. Well, I grew it last year, but it didn't bloom. Um, because I had imported them and there were some delays in shipping. So this year I will get to see it flower, but I've seen it when I was in China, and it has a story. At some point in China, the army went through and took away all things of beauty from every
Ugh.
person in the entire country. They couldn't grow their own food and they couldn't grow plants for ornamental, for pleasure. And when a friend of mine from China that was here getting his PhD at Auburn went back to China, there was a woman who brought him a plant when she found out about the research institute at Chenshan Botanic Garden. And she said, I traveled very far and I needed to bring this to you. It was my great great grandfather's. And when the army came through to destroy everything, he saved a piece and he hid it on the roof of
Mm.
our home. And when I heard that you were going to be doing Lotus research, I thought that this would be important to you. It has so many petals, it takes 2 full weeks to open.
Wow, astounding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it's often used for cut flower because
Mm-hmm.
it will persist in a vase. Most lotus drop their petals when they're cut from the plant, so you cut them as a bud, not a flower.
Mm-hmm.
But thousand petal lotus takes 2 weeks to open, so that you're going to get 2 weeks in a vase. And then as new petals are coming, old petals are falling off. So,
Okay, Kelly. Now you've planted that plant lust in me. Now I need a thousand petal lotus.
yeah, but
That just sounds amazing.
I'm a sucker
Yeah.
for a plant with a story. I can't
Oh,
help it.
it just sounds beautiful. And that does bring up one of the topics I wanted to ask you about, which is the increasing use of lotus in the cut flower trade. Are you finding that it's just the beginning maybe of this trend, or that people, especially floral designers and arrangers, weren't aware that you could even use a lotus?
Well, they notoriously have a reputation for not holding well in a vase as a flower.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because of current research, they're geared to, some of what they're creating to be of use in a vase for a longer period of time. Just like we make sweeter corn, redder tomatoes,
Mm-hmm.
we're making lotus that hold their petals longer. So there is a developing industry of cultivars that are going to be suitable as a cut flower, which we hadn't had before. It's at the beginning, very
Mm-hmm.
much at the beginning. And flower buds can be folded. Flower buds can be used in vases. They can be even dried, hung upside down, and painted. And it's a very crafty plant. You can use it for a lot of things. But for the real sole focus purpose of cut flower, that is in its infancy, especially in this country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I think one thing that we have to look forward to in coming years is the amazing variety we're about to see coming on the market in maybe, a decade or two.
Yeah, it's one of
Um,
the things that I want to focus on is, I love being around them all the
hmm
time, and I just think that it's even when I cut them, if they only last for 4 or 5 days, I'm still okay with that.
Hmm.
The process of them dropping their petals, the shape that changes, the color changes, even if it's 4 or 5 days, I'm okay with that. But I have an abundant supply. As that progresses, I think that they're going to be more and more in wedding bouquets and floral arrangements and things that, you know, we haven't seen previously.
Hmm. And by any chance, did you see the movie Crazy Rich Asians?
No.
Okay, so you have to go see it because there is a wedding scene um towards the end of the movie, and they flood the church or facility and make a water garden. That's where the wedding takes place.
Oh, wow.
And so there are floating lotuses and water lilies and that sort of thing. So listeners, if you haven't seen the movie, go see the movie and
Do you
check that out.
Yeah, do you recall the Olympics when they were
Hmm.
in China and the opening ceremony?
Oh yes,
And they
yeah.
had the circle of rice paddies that they flipped them and brought Lotus to the surface.
Oh,
It was
yes.
phenomenal, and then filled with mist. They're a very
Hmm.
romantic plant. Um,
Yeah, that is just stunning images.
yeah, that was pretty cool too.
So you touched on for the cut flower trade where the breeding is going in the direction of having longer lasting cut blooms. What are some of the other things in lotus breeding that people are looking for? I was thinking that variegation in the leaf might be something that people are striving for.
There is one variegated one that I know of.
Hmm.
A focus of a lot of hybridization has been red flowers, like
Mm.
true red flowers.
Yeah.
There are a lot of lotus that are called red that are really dark pink. But
Hmm.
they
More
were,
like a chair.
yeah,
Yeah.
they were the reddest pink ones at one
Hmm.
time, but now there are true red lotus, like garnet red.
Hmm.
Another thing is that most of the hybridization that was happening in Asian countries, and the parent plant there is pink. So
Hmm.
nearly all of them are pink or white or pale. Yellow was only recently introduced into hybridization of, say, modern times in Asia. So there are a lot of yellows that are coming to the market now. Dancing monkey and ottoman moling, and they're like buttercream and,
Hmm.
brilliant yellows that have much easier cultural requirements than the American lotus, which is actually quite difficult to grow outside of the wild.
Yeah, I was thinking that the reds, the striving for that true red was, obviously coming out of China, but I do know that even in the West, there's, the crepe myrtles, everybody wants that true red,
Hmm.
and there's several other plant breeding programs going on, even to get a red hydrangea, not just a dark pink, but deep red. So interesting.
There's also there's always been the striving for a blue lotus, which you'll
Hmm.
often see advertised on the internet. There's a company that's quite aggressive right now, and they show them with flower colors of teal and black and dark purple and neon blue, and they're all fake. They don't
Jeez.
exist. It isn't true. And if you look very closely at the ads, they're either photoshopped or they're plastic. And
Hmm.
it's really disheartening because a lot of people, are being taken by that, and it's a hybridizer's dream,
Hmm.
to have the blue lotus. We're still a little bit far away from that.
Yeah, and that's definitely a lesson for new gardeners out there that too good to be true, do your research, and that don't believe everything on the internet.
Yeah, there are an abundance of reputable growers,
Hmm.
and it's unfortunate for me that anyone would attempt to have something of great beauty and fail and then not try again
Hmm.
because they were giving something that wasn't, you know, going to give them the what they
Hmm.
were led to believe that they were going to get.
That
And
experience,
yeah, a
yeah.
bad
Hmm.
experience that leads them to not try it again and really have that beauty present.
Hmm. Well, let's hope that people, when their first Lotus growing experience or water gardening experience, that they have a first success. And if not, I always say it's not the grower's problem, it was the plant. And unless you killed it 2 or 3 times, then it might be you.
Yeah, they're
But yeah,
definitely one of the
yeah.
easiest plants to grow. They require
Hmm.
very little care and just ask that they not dry out and they get something to
Hmm.
eat once in a while. So they're quite easy to tackle.
And I would think my water garden is the least maintenance area of my entire garden, because I always say it doesn't need to be weeded. I don't have to water it in the summer heat. I
Hmm.
can't let the pot, obviously can't go completely dry, but as long as we have regular rain, I don't have to worry about it. And hardly fertilized because I have fish in there, and I feel like the fish feces are, that's fertilizing it enough.
Hmm.
Um, and the number one question, of course, we get for about water gardening is mosquitoes. Um, so lotus do grow in standing water. So I throw, every 2 weeks or so, some mosquito bits in the pot with my lotus because I don't have fish in that pot because it's not moving water.
One of the things that's probably one of the largest misconceptions. Um, for example, the 36-inch container that we stuck into my garden actually was the
Mm-hmm.
first thing there, and we built the entire garden around this 36-inch planter of lotus that sat out there in the middle of the turf, while it was waiting for the rest of the garden to come. But what we also learned is that in 2 weeks, my son was 4 or 5, and actually I just made a post about this. But I said, do you know what build it and they will come means? And
Mm-hmm.
we watched, and in 14 days, we had water boatmen, Daphne, water skates, dragonfly larvae, tadpoles, frogs, um, butterflies, bees, beetles, all kinds, an abundance of life that came to this little puddle of water. So it, even without fish, dragonfly larvae, tadpoles,
Mm-hmm.
water boatmen, they all eat mosquito larvae. So, you know, to, it's a misconception that because you have standing water, you're going to have mosquitoes. A
Mm-hmm.
mosquito's preference is actually to have a stagnant pool where there are no predators. So it's not going to choose a lotus bowl as its first choice for laying eggs. In a drought, well, then they might be forced to do some things out of
Mm-hmm.
character, but they already know that there's going to be other predators there. And often that happens all by itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the main benefits of water gardening is that every wildlife, every creature in the area is immediately attracted to water. It's something primeval in all of our cells, that Jungian primate brain that we long for water, and so we're always attracted to that.
Hmm. Along with everybody else. And it's
Mm-hmm.
simply amazing how quickly they come.
So I want to move on to the next phase in a lotus's life. We talked about the flowers for a bit and a little bit on the foliage, but the dried seed pods are something that's beautiful in themselves and pretty amazing.
Again, I got to see lotus through the eyes of my children, and I can tell you that we had lotus pods. Most people spray paint them silver or gold and add them to a
Mm-hmm.
Christmas tree or a wreath or a flower arrangement. We had zebra stripes, we had blue, we had polka dots, we had ones where the inside of the seed cell was, if there were 36 holes, there were 36 colors painted inside that seed pod.
Wow.
So it is a great plant for providing a means for creativity, and seed pods is, yes, definitely one of them.
Mm-hmm. They're like nature's perfect toy almost because you can manipulate them and take the seeds out and put them back in. I don't know if I would let a toddler alone with the seeds,
Yeah, no,
but
probably not.
yeah, probably not. But fun for older children.
Yeah, we've cut them. They have a beautiful pattern, even the seed pods. If you cut them, and you can dip them in paint, and you can stamp things with them.
Hmm.
Even inside the seed pod, when you cut it in half, there's a whole nother layer of beauty underneath. So Longwood Gardens has a magical water garden display, which includes Lotus. And they usually have upwards of a dozen different cultivars, the main one being very large. Chanticleer is not far from there, and they have a
Mm-hmm.
lovely little lotus garden down in the bottom of the valley. Mount Cuba actually is a native plant garden in Delaware. They also have some lotus, and Ladue Topiary Garden has a little bit.
Mm.
In one of their gardens, they've added lotus. And if you, besides Kenilworth, which is probably the premier lotus destination in the entire mid-Atlantic area, um, there's always childlike excitement about going to Kenilworth to see the
Mm-hmm.
amazing amount of lotus that they have. And then as far as a retailer, Lily Ponds has lotus, and they're in Lily Ponds, Maryland, which is out near Frederick.
Mm-hmm.
And those are about most of the ones that I can think of.
Yep. Yeah, most of the public gardens in our area, they might have a small water garden or stream bed garden. But Longwood, the terrace in back of the large conservatory is not to be missed, I will say.
Longwood in general is not to be
Yeah.
missed. Actually, all the botanic gardens in that area are quite
Mm-hmm.
lovely.
Yeah.
Winterthur, they don't all have lotus, but it is, you couldn't go and do multiple ones in a day.
Mm-mm.
But and actually, Washington D.C. has, the U.S. Botanic Garden, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the gardens, the Smithsonian and Kenilworth. There's plenty
Mm-hmm.
to see there too.
And the National Arboretum, which is actually across the Anacostia from Kenilworth, and one day they'll be easier to access from each other. They're gonna put like a little boat landing and an easier access and a bike trail. But it's funny because they do face each other on the river, but nobody knows that.
I didn't know
So
that.
yeah, so at one time they had discussed doing a co-festival, so maybe a crepe myrtle festival on the Arboretum side at the same time as the Water Lily and Lotus Festival on the Kenilworth side. But that got set aside.
That would be
So,
fantastic.
I would love to go back and forth. And if they had like a little, shuttle boat or something, that would just be a wonderful day to spend in DC.
Yeah, it would. I did a project at the FDA, and it's water lilies and crepe myrtles, and they're just
Mm.
both in peak season, and it's magical together.
Yes, that's like a great mid to late summer DC trend. The other thing I was thinking about for water gardening is the downtown Frederick waterways that they've built up, the creek, which is mostly water lilies in that case. I don't think it's too many lotus plants being used at that installation.
They did a fantastic job. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Lily Ponds is in a large part responsible for that happening.
Mm-hmm.
They do have a tremendous amount of water lilies and shallow water plants, lots of cannas and taro
Oh,
and
yeah.
pickerel. And so they have a lot of other plant material, and there are some lotus in there too. But they did a very nice job. It's a very sort of eclectic and artsy, and restaurants. It's a good day trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lovely just, you know, have a nice brunch and walk around downtown Frederick shopping and then walk along the waterway and see those fantastic water garden plantings. And speaking of art, so I was going to say your part of your business or your hobby maybe more is making lotus art. Can you describe some of those pieces?
Yeah, my children, again, being largely responsible for their innocent creativity, we would pretty much turn anything into an art project. And a friend of mine went to Thailand with the International Water Gardening Society uh, one year, and I wasn't able to attend. And she brought me back a box wrapped in a lotus leaf that was painted red and gold. And
Hmm.
I had inquired to Thailand, how do you do that? And they said, well, it's a Thai trade secret.
Huh.
And I thought, Tide trade secret. Well, then I'm just been challenged. So I started fooling around with different ways to dry the leaves, press them. So they're growing in a very wet environment and they're
Mm-hmm.
also not flat. So you have to fold them and manipulate them and then get them to dry. And they are full of a lot of water. So tackling that, I can't say I have perfected it. And I have failed a lot. But I have been able to attach them to a canvas and then I paint them with generally about 9 layers of color
Wow.
infused,
Mm-hmm.
um, primarily metallic paint on canvas.
Mm.
It's the
Yeah.
therapy for me, really.
And you get to, enjoy them all year round.
Yes, yes.
That's amazing. Any other type of artwork you're doing with the plants?
No, my nieces, I have one of them is also an artist. My mom was an artist. My aunt was an artist. So they've sort of been infused into different projects here and there. Um, they're quite beautiful, the stems and the parts and the pieces when you cut into them. So they've been used in a less traditional format,
Mm.
but nothing consistent. They're usually part of a project that has something to do with, nature
Mm-hmm.
and natural materials.
Nice. So, you touched on the International Water Lily and Water Gardening Society, which for our listeners is iwgs.org.org. How long have you been involved in this society?
I think my first symposium was in 1988.
Wow.
And um, I had no experience growing things in the water outside of, a couple of water lilies throughout my youth. They were an immense amount of information, mentorship, friendship. If you're looking for information, they're a terrific resource. And if we don't know the answer, we will find the answer or put you in touch with a person who can help guide you. I
Mm-hmm.
mentor through the IWGS, and I have students in Bangladesh, India, South America, um, and here in the United States that I can think of. Um, so we offer assistance for anyone from growers to consumers to, hobbyists, um, professional research facilities, things like that. Um, one of the things we're working on is certifying collections. So if you want to see a lot of plants, you can find places worldwide to go and
Hmm.
see them for inspiration.
And that that annual symposium has gone to some amazing places.
Yeah, I never thought that playing in the mud was going to take me around the world. And the symposium typically does 2 years in the United States and then 1 year abroad. Uh,
Hmm.
Recently, we've been to Texas, Pennsylvania, France, uh, going to Canada, which was going to be next year, but now we've had to postpone the Naples, Florida, which would have been this year. It will be 2021, and then Canada will follow that. It will be the
Hmm.
west coast of Canada. We've been to Toronto before, many other countries from Thailand to a lot of European countries, South America. There have been trips to the Amazon through the IWGS, so they get around. We're pretty well connected worldwide. Our most recent country that has joined is Russia.
Hmm.
We never had any Russian members, and we do now. It's kind of
That's
exciting.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And I have to confess that I am one of my many other hats is as editor of the IWGS Water Garden Journal,
Yes.
which is a quarterly journal, and Kelly has been super helpful and instrumental in getting a lot of the content for that journal. And the journal is not like a lot of other society journals where it's very science and techy, so there might be some technical breeding articles, but a lot of it, the lay gardener or beginning water gardener can jump right in and totally read it and enjoy it.
Yeah, you do a great job putting that together. Um, we try to put something in there for everyone, from a beginner to,
Hmm.
someone who's in research and development. And I think we pull that off pretty good, especially more recently.
Yeah, I think it's grown over the years, and also IWGS membership has broadened, I believe, over the years to um, there's, from the plant geek and professional side to people who are I just can't get enough of photographing water lilies or lotus or the wildlife that goes along with water gardening.
Yeah, and I think that there is a trend of aquatic plants that is
Hmm.
rejuvenated. We see that, as I said, Russia. We never had anyone from Russia in the Water Garden Society, and they're very active actually. So we touch most of the globe, Australia, of course, all the European countries. I mean, it's New Zealand.
Hmm.
I can't think of a country that we don't have participating, actually.
Yeah, and it's a challenge because the journal is in English, but a lot of the content is coming from non-English speaking members. So there's always that filter of trying to, establish clear communication between everybody. But I think it works.
I think it works.
Yeah. So for those who are interested in joining, it's iwgs.org, and they also have a very active Facebook discussion page and group. So International Water Lily and Water Gardening Society on Facebook. If you join onto that, you will definitely dive right in, so to speak.
Yeah, the group page. So if you go to the IWGS page and then ask to be a member of the group, it
Hmm.
is hugely active. And if you want to know what's new, what's up and coming, what kinds of new colors are being created, shapes, sizes,
Hmm.
from enormous to the size of your thumbnail water lilies, it's pretty exciting stuff. Even if you're not wholly into it, but just if you want to see some really beautiful flowers.
Yeah, just scrolling through that Facebook feed of people's photos is just enchanting.
It is.
It's just one beautiful flower after another. So how can our listeners catch up with you, Kelly, and your business?
I am sort of a jack of all trades. I
Mm-hmm.
have a long history of water quality improvement. So I work sort of under the guise of any size, always with an attention to ease of maintenance, um, water quality without a lot. I'm not a chemical proponent. I'm not a band-aid fix it kind of, but more from a
Mm-hmm.
bottom up perspective. I believe that, Mother Nature has been purifying bodies of water for millions of years. And it's much less complicated than when you dive into it, you might believe. I think human beings by nature, we try to engineer solutions. And I'm more
Mm-hmm.
of a holistic approach in that you can achieve balance if you don't meddle too much. Um, and, you know, it's very easy. So I work on projects that are 40-acre lake to a small container garden on your deck or patio. So I do some consulting. I also am doing some growing. I do planting. I do maintenance. I do design and layout. I work a lot with swim ponds,
Mm-hmm.
swimming pools that use plants as the filter in entirety. They're chemical free. So how can you plant effectively, to keep your water body healthy?
Mm-hmm.
Swim ponds are growing in popularity in the United States quite a bit, actually, in the last few years, as people are trying to get
Yeah.
farther away from, chlorine or salt or chemicals. Very
That's
popular in Europe.
exactly. And that's a very exciting trend that I'm so happy to see more of in the US is the swim pond, d- converting that chemical pool into a living, breathing ecosystem that you can enjoy as well.
Yeah, lawns and swimming pools kind of hand in hand, chemical sinkholes, and that trend is changing. And there's more
Mm-hmm.
acceptance of diversity and a whole ecosystem. And swim ponds, about the only difference is you don't put fish in. That's not to say that fish won't come, because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
it comes on a bird's foot or something, but it is for human swimming. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not as difficult as you might think. You know, Mother Nature's pretty powerful. If you can um, help get her improve her efficiency, I guess was the
Mm-hmm.
word I was looking for. So, and there are ways to do that, and plants that are better than others at accomplishing certain goals. So,
Hey. And then people can reach you through kellybilling.com, and it sounds just like it's spelled just like it sounds.
yep,
And water becomes a garden, all one word, no spaces or dashes. Waterbecomesagarden.com will take you to the same website, correct?
that's correct.
All right. And so Kelly Billing, aquatic consultant and grower, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it was my pleasure, Kathy.
Cannot wait to go dip my feet out in my backyard pond this weekend and get in the muck.
Yeah, if I have my way, then there won't be anyone without a lotus. So, don't know what
That
you're
would be
missing.
that would be a beautiful, beautiful vision. And thank you again, Kelly.
All right, thank you, Kathy.
So I'm not going to hang up. I was going to say there was one water garden in the area that we did forget about, which is Glenstone.
Glenstone. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
You know what? Maybe because it's modern and it's new and I've never
Mm-hmm.
been.
That's what I was
Um,
thinking. I was like, all of a sudden it popped into my head at the end. I was like, Glenstone's going to be mad at us, but whatever. They're going to live. It's because they are newer.
do you want to do it and try to edit it in?
I could try. I could maybe I'll ask a question and try to insert it in there. Be tough. Okay, so let me say.
Oh, you know what you could ask me?
Mm-hmm.
Mixing art and aquatic plants.
Yeah. Okay. So let me
Because
check
we've
the
talked about
time.
art and we've talked about plants,
Yeah.
so I don't know, and I'll try
Let
to
me.
answer it really quickly.
Okay.
Where is it located? What town?
It's in Potomac,
Potomac.
Maryland.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So 19 dot. Okay. So Kelly, we've talked about water gardening as a hobby and an art, and there's a place in the area that combines both.
Glenstone in Potomac.
Mm-hmm.
There are a visual art museum, as well as one of the most beautiful water features you can imagine.
And they have a unique system in their gallery in their water garden. So they're using not chemicals, but I believe an ozone system.
Yes, ozone is a little bit tricky,
Mm-hmm.
but they have achieved it. They've done it very well, and it is an option for pond filtration. And they are also very heavy on plants, which of course contributes to the whole ecosystem balance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a beautiful, beautiful garden.
And for those who aren't familiar with Glenstone, it's a fairly new public garden and art installation complex with several galleries and huge outdoor sculptures. That's in Potomac, Maryland, and you could just Google Glenstone. Right now, because of the COVID, it is closed, but it should hopefully be back open to visitors this summer, and it's completely free. You just have to make a reservation on their online reservation website.
Yeah, one of the sad things of COVID is that many of the botanic gardens and outdoor spaces are not being enjoyed this season, and
Mm-hmm.
that's quite a pity.
And it's all the more reason to have a little bit of paradise in your own backyard if you can put in even just a small water garden pot or water garden on a small scale to enjoy that.
Yeah, one of the benefits of the water gardens, no matter if they're big or small, is the abundant life that they bring, um, which is different than your other containers and gardens. You get birds and butterflies and bees and things like that. But water gardens bring a whole nother element.
Mm-hmm. It's that whole essence of life, that water giving life force.
Yep.
All right, thank you, Kelly.
You're quite welcome, Kathy.
For this week's What's Blooming in the Garden segment, I decided to sit out here next to my waterfall and water garden and describe a little bit of what's in bloom inside of it. I have annual water hyacinth floating plants that send up their purple-white blooms. I have irises, yellow, and also the dark purple black gamecock. Surrounding the pond, I have some plantings with the fun allium globemaster. I have some native ephemerals still putting up a little bit of blooms. Dianthus pinks are just starting to bloom themselves. And then I have several pots of herbs, and I have my giant urn filled with water and a miniature lotus, which is just starting to leaf out. Beyond that, Lavender Phenomenal is starting to put up some buds. Hopefully in the next week or so we'll have some actual blooms. I have several different peonies just bursting into bloom. And then my favorite David Austin rose, Olivia, has numerous buds on it, but none have quite opened up yet. I expect that to happen hopefully by the end of this weekend. And then I'm walking away from the waterfall so you can hear me hopefully a little bit better, just to say that the spiderworts along the pathway are popping open in their dark purple hues, and several weigela, as I discussed last week, are still going strong. A couple different clematis, taiga, and silver moon are off in the distance, and then deutzia and spirea are putting on their late spring, early summer show. So I particularly wanted to recommend those two small shrubs for, I would think, what we would call the bridge season between the early to mid spring flowering plants and then our summer flowering plants. Both spirea and deutzia are a great shrub to get you over that hump in the garden where you might have finished all your bulbs, but the summer shrubs like hydrangea haven't started yet. Happy gardening! Plant profile, Calamintha. Calamintha is a low-growing bushy perennial that prefers full sun and well-drained soils. Once established, it is extremely drought-tolerant. It is a member of the mint family. It resembles catmint, and the Latin epithet nepeta and common name calamint leads to some confusion between the two plants. It has a long bloom period, typically from June up to a hard frost. Calamintha's flowers are loved by pollinators and detested by deer. It does well in rock gardens, at border edges, and in containers. An ideal situation for Calamintha is planted under and among roses, where it creates fluffy underskirts around the bare lower rose canes. Think of it as a great smelling replacement for baby's breath. Two Calamintha varieties that I recommend are White Cloud and Montrose White. The latter is sterile and won't reseed. It is maintenance-free beyond cutting it back in late fall or early spring. Try a Calamintha in your garden today. You can grow that. Thank you for listening to Garden DC. You can become a listener supporter by going to anchor.fm/Kathy-Gents/support. For as little as 99 cents a month, you can become a listener supporter, and we'll give you a shout out in a future episode. Another way to support Garden DC is to go to WashingtonGardener.com and subscribe to Washington Gardener Magazine.
Hi, this is Kendra Brickley. I wanted to find out about harvesting asparagus. I've got just two asparagus spears that are coming up, and then I've got another couple that are first year fuzzy ferns, kind of looking, and wanted to find out. I'm having trouble finding information on when to harvest, and or if I should just leave my existing stocks out for another year to grow up.
That is an excellent question, Kendra, and thanks for asking. So asparagus is a little tricky. The first few years, you do want to leave the onesie-twosie spears that you get coming up to leaf out and to gain strength and to send that back down to the roots so that in subsequent harvests you get many more spears. The recommendation is to not harvest for the first 3 years minimum. After that, you can take a couple of spears and then let the rest go up, and you might do that for another 2 to 3 years. Then after that, 7th year or so, you'll start to get what I would consider a decent crop. So it takes a little bit of patience as we learn from a lot of gardening, but soon you'll have a really nice asparagus harvest. You can find Washington Gardener online at WashingtonGardener.com, on Twitter at WDC Gardener, on Instagram at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook.com at Washington Gardener Magazine.